Hey, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on this virtual tour. First of all, I'd just like to start off by thanking the Shadow and Star Cinema, the BFI Doc Society Fund, BBC Arena, and last but not least, I would also like to thank the Bertha Foundation. So thank you and welcome for joining. On today's panel, we have Rob Lincoln, who is the producer and director of the African Apocalypse. We also have Femi, who is the writer and narrator. We also have the esteemed Dr. Robert Beckford, and we have Natural Langdon, who is a a BA Arts and Film graduate and is currently making a film as well. So welcome. Audience, I encourage you to participate. It's not going to be a fantastic discussion without you. So let's kick off. Now, guys, Dr. Beckford, what did you think of the film?
Well, first of all, good evening, everybody. And thank you for this wonderful opportunity to participate. And also, I just want to say well done to Femi and the crew, everybody else who's involved in this production. I'd like to say three things I think are really important and positive, and then raise three questions, if that's okay. So three positive things are, first of all, I think it's really important that you have insurrected this subjugated history. I think that's a really important decolonial task that all historians, all academics, all right-minded people have to do in the age in which we live in. And I think you've done that brilliantly by highlighting neglected history in Niger and its connection to the present. The second thing is, I think that's really important that you deal with what the great dean of African-American religious studies, Charles Long, called oppugnancy, raising the spectre of racial terror and how it impacted on Black lives in the past and how it continues to influence us in the present. Not many programs, not many ideas out there that want to engage with racial terror and its continuity in the present. So I'm really pleased that you did that. I think there's also a gesturing in the film towards the spirituality of colonization. And what I mean by that is the way in which colonialism is an occult practice. It was an evil. And Charles Long talks about this, the way in which the coming of the West upon Africa is a spiritual activity, because it not only destroys flesh and bone, but it destroys cosmology. When you destroy people's cosmology and their worldview, you're attacking their very spirituality. And I think the film does that really well, at gesturing towards the occult of colonialism and its brutality, beyond fleshly brutality, into the psyche and spirituality of African people. But I also think there are three questions to raise, if you allow me to continue. I think, first of all, we need to think about how we decolonize documentary itself, because documentary in its original form, Grierson talked about documentary having social value. And I think that we could decolonize this product, this film, by making sure it's connected to other discourses, other movements that are dealing with these issues. I think there's a danger when documentary just stands on its own and isn't engaged with social political movements that Black people are engaged with. So that it really does have social value. So we have to ask the question, what does documentary as social value mean in the present? And I think that's one way in which this film may need to connect with anti-colonial struggles, neo-colonial struggles, the reparations movement in particular. I think there's a need to ground it within that. I think there's also, related to that, a need for us to think about how this film engages with making those responsible for atrocities in the past accountable. The reparations movement, what does that mean in Niger? What does it mean in Western Africa to talk about reparations movement? How does this film situate within that discourse? The other question is, I was kind of intrigued that there's a great deal in this film about Britain, and that shapes the narrative regarding Cecil Rhodes. So I was kind of intrigued why there wasn't more on how Britain has a history that engages with racial terror, the brutalization, Holocaust of African people, that connects us directly to all of our major institutions. So I was hoping for more reflection on, say, the Cecil Rhodes dynamic as well. So to summarize, I think it's an absolutely brilliant film. I think it does three things incredibly well, but for the sake of debate and discussion, I thought it was important to throw out three critical questions as well.
Fabulous. Okay, Femi, I'm going to go to you first. If If I could just ask, before we answer those three critical questions, because they are very important, if I can just ask Landon, if you would just introduce yourself for us, that would be absolutely awesome. Then we're going to go to Femi, and then Rob will come to you.
Hello. Peace, everyone. My name is Natural Langdon. I'm a filmmaker and a PhD student at Newcastle University. And I'm also on a journey to make a film in a similar vein. So this was very inspiring to me. And also just looking at the different stages that I saw Femi kind of evolve through. I was very interested in just his insight and his psyche going through the process. So I'll be asking a lot of questions about that, and also curious about all the questions that Robert just brought up, because I feel like this film is impactful in so many ways, but it does raise so many questions.
Most definitely it does. It really, really, really does. We could debate and talk for absolutely hours about some of the things that this amazing film has brought up. So going straight to you, Femi.
Hi, I'm Femi. If you just watched the film, you've probably seen a lot of my face for the past 2 hours. Yeah, I think the points you raise are really important, Rob. Robert. I'll say Robert to distinguish from Rob, the director, Robert. And for sure, the English element is not interrogated as much in this film. I mean, it's kind of nodded to. We have obviously the fact that my background as an activist is as an activist in the Cecil Rhodes movement. And we have a nod to the fact that colonialism was a European enterprise, insofar as we explicitly say the British did the same thing in Andaman, the Germans did the same thing in Namibia. This was not just a French mission; this was a European kind of project. But I think the issue with documentary, as you say, is that you have to fit a lot into 1.5 hours. And even within the one story of Voulais, there was stuff we had to leave out. We had to leave out stuff about the resistance to the conquest. We had to leave out stuff about about various scenes that we filmed with people there that would have been very, very good material. And I think it's the hope of that I have is that this is the first of a number of projects I can be involved in, some of which will look at British colonialism, some of which will look at Portuguese colonialism, some of which will look at German colonialism, some of which may look at the transatlantic slave trade, and that it's not going to be just this one documentary. It's going to be the start of an ongoing project that can hopefully attack Britain and, well, not attack Britain, but attack the British mainstream narrative of its history, as well as that of other European countries. I think that the Voulais story is very, very, very compelling, but it's not the only story in the in Europe's kind of very, very dark colonial history. And we don't all know. The point is that we don't all know about King Leopold of Belgium, or about the Herero genocide, or about the Mau Mau. Everyone knows about Hitler, but not everyone knows about these things. But within those of us who study colonial history, there are some stories which have been told to some degree. We've seen the Congo and King Leopold's ghost. We know about the Mau Mau case and the Kenyans and this, that, the rest. But there are so many more, which, like this story of Voulais, are at the moment very, very obscure and uncovered, and we really need really need to be interrogated. I think you are completely correct in saying the documentary can't stand alone. It can't just be, okay, cool, this thing is on BBC and it's gone to a film festival and a few more people know about Voulais. That's the end of the topic. I think for sure it has to start a conversation about reparation. We've been talking with people that I've known for some years in the UK, like Glenroy Watson and various other people basically who are involved in reparations movements here. The same in France, hopefully. I'm hoping to reach out and meet some of the reparation activists that live in France, and also just some of the general Black parallels of Black Lives Matter in France, justice for Amadou, justice for Theo, all of these kind of movements. And there is talk about a possible legal case to be put against the French state by Niger or by some Nigerians, including one of the people who we interviewed in the film, who is now running for has just got in for office in his local municipality in Niger, and using this film as a as part of that case. I mean, do you have anything more to say on that specifically, Rob?
Yeah, thanks. I think thanks for those 3 points, actually. Yeah, I would say that, firstly, I do think that, whereas Emmanuel Macron in France has ordered an inquiry into colonial crimes in Algeria, and he's appointed a French historian, which has caused a lot of controversy, Niger is not even particularly well known even in France. So I think that we would hope that this film will be, a kind of an outreach program in France will enable this film to get this story, to give the story of the conquest of, or the invasion of Niger a much higher profile. And as the Sultan of Bernenkoni said, if Voulet had been doing this today, he'd be going to the International Criminal Court at the Hague. And, and so I think that would be one thing. I think when Robert, you say, why not more on Britain? I think, the film of this, like any film, this is not really a sort of straightforward television film. This film is come out of a complicated genesis as a cinema documentary, which actually originated as an adaptation of a book called Exterminate All the Brutes by Sven Lindqvist, which is a Swedish book which covers some similar material. Before I met Femi, I went to Niger as a result of wanting to make a film that was a fiction film based on that book, and realized that actually in the book, the writer travels from north to south and arrives at the end of pretty much where Voulet gets killed. But in reality, you needed to go west to east, and it seemed to me a more interesting story. So we stopped adapting the book and turned it into a documentary with fiction kind of, should we say, structures to it, which kind of came from the work that I'd done on the book. But I did sort of, before I met Femi, and actually even after meeting, we kind of looked very hard to see, could we find a British connection to this story? Could we find something that would basically enable us to tell a story? And the reality was that the Voulet story enabled this film to sort of attempt to A, tell a story that wasn't known, but B, to tell a story about colonialism that we hoped was going to be a universalized story of colonialism. So not just something that was just about the history of just what happened in Niger and blah, 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 you should know about it, but actually trying to sort of say, well, this is the essence of colonialism that we were exploring. And that's why we kind of worked so deeply with Heart of Darkness as a text. So I think the accountability, the why not more in Britain, hopefully we've just, and then the decolonizing documentary, I certainly think that I do hope that this film and the various sort of programs that will come from it, not television programs, but sort of activities that will come from it may lead to, younger British-based filmmakers, children of colonial, formerly colonized people, or continuing to be colonized people, making films about some of the subjects that Femi's talked about. We already know a lot about. There's a lot to say about the British in Sudan and the Germans in Namibia, and to find creative ways of the current younger generations of 20-something people. Millennials are they called? I think we're just discussing who's what relationship. Trying to make a way of making colonialism kind of really something that actually is right at the center of the way that people understand the structures of power in the world, so that we can all move to a process of decolonialism or decolonization in all of our different worlds and places and spaces.
Thank you. And I think those are some really important points to kind of like tease out that whole concept of decolonialization. One of the things that, I mean, I just want to say, we're going to jump onto The Heart of Darkness. And if you've done any form of English literature or humanities or anything, this will be a staple part of your text. And one of the things the book has actually been criticized about, which is in a lot of texts that we study at an academic level, is that it actually denies the natives, the indigenous people, the right to speak on their behalf. And it's always kind of like who holds the lens. Whereas African Apocalypse, we have the lens. The indigenous people have the lens. The people from the diaspora have the lens. So my question to you as a panel, I'll go to you, Natural, is how important is it for us when we're looking at decolonization to ensure that we have the lens and we tell the story?
I was battling with that, with even in African Apocalypse, because, obviously Rob directed it, so that already plays a major part in kind of how perspective and perception is. Then also Femi, although he's African and Black, he still went to another land, right, where they also recognized him almost as a white man, or as, not African in the same sense as them. And even his own duality, his struggle as he was there, and, too Black, too white, too this, too that, you know what I mean? So, and then hearing parts of people speak that was from there, but not really knowing their story. We're hearing bits and pieces of their story. So it was a interesting perspective to be at, because also I'm looking through Femi's eyes, I'm looking through Rob's choices, and I'm listening to what the people are saying and the pain that they're experiencing that I could not understand totally, right? Even though I have my own pains and struggles, it still wasn't from their perspective. I didn't feel like it was still from that voice. I felt like there was manipulation, whether good or bad, in the voice, right? Because it also came from books, it came from studying, it came from all of these other, filmmaking. Who has the right to make these type of films? Who has the position and the power and the money to make these films? Who's showing the films? Who's backing it? Like, a lot of the stuff you can't get around colonization, and perspective and story, and who has the right to tell, our stories. Mm-hmm. So I'm a bit torn between everything, but also it was done in such a great way where you have to now say, okay, at least the information is getting out there. At least the story is being told. And at least there's something being pushed, right, to kind of give a different perspective. So there's so much going on with the film.
I 100% agree. I think that when we look at decolonization, it's multi-layered, okay? Because we're looking at text that is problematic in of itself. We're looking at key things you said about who's backing it, where it's being screened, all of these kind of things. But I think it's the right step, I think it's the right step in moving forward, and the platform. This to me is a bit of definite decolonization work. It has to start somewhere. Personally, burn the books. But then I think if we did that, we still wouldn't have anywhere to go, because we'd be removing that. So we have to kind of like examine the text, critique the text, show the problems in the text, why the texts are racist, for a want of a better word, and then build on that and build new foundations and legacies. Dr. Robert, what's your viewpoint?
Well, I would say, I thought three things. I think the film made some great choices in terms of enabling the local people to speak. I love the dialogue with the two assistants that you had, the two guides, and even some of the protective people as well. I thought that added real texture and gave local people a voice. So I didn't feel it was you, Femi, jumping in as a Westerner and voyaging through their experience. I felt there was real dialogue. So I felt that the power relation was mitigated by the narrative, the way in which you engage with the local people. So I thought that was really, really good. I think, though, that there's a, so I think that always happens when you're making films anyway. There's always power issues. It's how you navigate them. Second thing is, and just to give my own work a plug, Femi, you might want to check out my book on documentary, which is called Documentary as Exorcism, Resisting the Bewitchment of Colonial Christianity. What I argue in that is that documentary filmmaking is a spiritual practice for African people, but also I talk about the way in which I use signifying. What I call in Jamaica, playing fool to catch wise, and Nancy, how signifying practice. So no matter who I was working with as a director, I always found ways in which I would ensure that either subliminally or through metaphor, I got the points across that I wanted to my main audience, which was an African Caribbean audience. So there are ways in which, again, we mitigate who we're working with and the power relationships. There's lots of ways in which Black filmmakers have done that over the course of time. Third thing I want to say is, I think we need to distinguish between decolonization and decoloniality. Don't want to get too fussy about technical terms, but it's my day job. That's what we have to do. And what the Latino post-colonialists, decolonial theorists have taught us is that we need to look at the way in which decoloniality gets at the power structures of colonialism. The fact that colonization may have ended, independence in the 1960s, but the structures of thought are still with us. So therefore, when we're engaging in any kind of decolonizing practice, we're trying to get at those power relationships, the epistemologies, the structures of thinking that maintain the coloniality. And I think that the film gets to grips with some of that really well in terms of the historiography, looking at how the history has been mistold or evaded, and therefore there's a need to retell the history, looking at the way in which the history has resonance in the present with the experience of Femi at Oxford, Cecil Rhodes, Black Lives Matter. Could have had a bit more about Black Lives Matter, but maybe that's just the way things turned out with COVID and everything happening time-wise. You didn't get much for that. So I think there were gestures towards that in a very powerful way. What I think you can add to this, want to be completely African-centered in terms of African-centered spirituality and cosmology, is where's the redemption? You see, there's got to be hope for people. How do we, in filmmaking, ensure that people have hope beyond hope, so that they see that there are ways in which we can act in the present to redeem this past, a kind of redemptive history? If I can give another one of my books a plug, God of the Rotted, Redeeming Rage. It's all about how do we redeem this history? How do we make it work so it is a force that liberates us in the present and empowers those around us, no matter who they are ethnically, whether they're people of color, people of European descent? How do we ensure that this creative activity redeems and transforms?
I love that. I think there were some key points in there, and I really love the stuff about redemption. I want to throw something else in there about resistance as well. I think what's kind of slightly problematic with a lot of the texts that we study academically is that generally I hate the noble savage narrative. I hate some of the stereotypes that have been established. And I think that sometimes what we don't see is redemption and resistance. However, I think for Femi being a young millennial, what's happened is he's kickstarted a very important conversation and discussion, because for the first time we're seeing texts critiqued, we're seeing things explored from a different perspective. To plug myself, I've done a couple of lectures at the Royal School of Speech and Drama to creative producers, and a lot of the questions I'm asked is we want to tell these stories about representation. And one of the first things I always say is why? Why do you want to tell this story? What is it? What is the purpose for telling this story? Is this story to platform another race, people's, minority group, culture, a platform to tell their own stories? Is it just so that you can have kudos for telling this story? So I put this to you, Rob. What was your motivation for wanting to make this film and examine this text? Because the thing with The Heart of Darkness is actually a piece, it's not just a piece of text, it's actually a major part of British literature, So what was your motivation?
Yeah. Okay. Great. I mean, interesting question, and quite a few questions all wrapped up in there. I mean, I think firstly, as far as I was concerned, we were not really examining the text of Heart of Darkness and the figure of Joseph Conrad in a historical or cultural kind of way. We were attempting to use the text and initially when the BBC became involved, because it was that part of the BBC that was interested in supporting this film, they wanted, I think, a little bit more in that regard. From my point of view, I felt that actually what we were doing was that we were avoiding the questions that Chinua Achebe raises about the racism of Conrad and the racism of excluding African voices. We were avoiding that simply because we were not trying to do a film about how do we feel about Heart of Darkness as part of the canon of Western literature, etc., and that it's taught, as you say, Sarah, in all, everybody studies it who goes so far in literature studies in certainly in Britain and America, but that we were using the text to try and get at the archetype, the sort of psychology and the archetype of the white supremacist. We talk about how many other people there may have been as models of this person, Kurtz. Cecil Rhodes was a person. There are many, many characters that have been talked about. So we're try to use the text to sort of get at that thing. I think that when you ask why be interested in this subject, the point of the film originally was to actually was really to say, look, colonial history and colonialism is something that is denied in Britain, other than as some kind of period history, which has got sort of maybe a few bloody massacres in it and a few awkward stories, but ultimately, it's all over now. It's not ever seen as being all of the violence and all of the oppression of colonialism is actually what creates the world that we live in now. Here in Britain, in France, in America, in Germany, all these, the entire structures of where you get your jobs, where the banks are, all the different things. These are all been created by the colonial period. And we're obviously only looking at one part of the colonial period, that period that kind of came in on Niger at the end of the 19th century. That obviously went on for hundreds of years before that. But I think the point was to try and say, well, let's try and get it into a kind of an area in film where it could be discussed, and really events kind of brought them to a much more central stage than we could have imagined. And so, obviously we would have always hoped that a film like this would be able to lead to action, not just stuff about representation and blah, 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 but actually to be like what people are going to do. How can people be maybe galvanized to sort of do stuff and become active in dealing with the issues that this kind of that this film raises, and that colonialism poses for how everybody understands themselves and how we go forward. But the action has kind of been started this year in a way that perhaps was is amazing, and we can only hope that it continues. As Robert says, we could have done more Black Lives Matter. I mean, we were sort of, I don't know what, maybe halfway through editing the final part of the stretch of the editing of the film when the sort of uprisings and the protests started in June. So we weren't really in a position to sort of do too much of that. And I think, if you talk about redemption, I suppose I hope to feel that I hope to suggest that maybe the audience might feel, and maybe more if we're in real cinemas, that from the amazing uplifting music of Tunde Jegede at the end and the sense of concerted action. Okay, everybody's just in a huge park in Oxford. It could be anywhere, but our story is set in Oxford. It's all we find places that we try and make universal connections with through what we're doing. Femi lives in Oxford, I live in Oxford. That's how we started the film, and that's how we got going on making the film in the first place. But in that huge field, which is called South Park in Oxford, there were, I don't know what, nearly 2,000 people, and everybody was kind of concerted on believing that, yeah, Black Lives Matter, policing in Britain is racist. Policing in America is racist. You know, lots of stuff needs to be done about education. Lots of stuff needs to be done about employment. Lots of stuff needs to be done about racism and connecting it all with the history, as you could see with all those placards. People really saying, you know, this is all coming out of a long history that we are all living with, and there we are with the spires of Oxford just down the hill. So we're all living in the shadow of this. So I hope that the combination of that sense of communal coalition activity between people who are of African descent, Black people, white people of European descent, Asian people, you know, all people of all, from all ethnicities coming together and doing stuff, and you know, and I think the Tunde music is very inspiring at the end. So I hope there was a bit of a feeling of redemption, but also kind of inspiration for how to go forward from it.
Thank you, Rob. And Femi, I posed the same question to you in terms of what steps need to be taken for you to be able to move beyond, even in your filmmaking career, to move beyond this history, this legacy. How do you see that happening? How do you intend to do that? You're on mute.
Yeah. So move beyond the legacy. Which legacy specifically?
The legacy of colonialism, I think.
I don't think you can move
what's left behind.
Move beyond it as such. I mean, that was a question that the schoolgirls asked the professor in the classroom. They said, "Has France ever repaired for, in any way, or paid any kind of reparation to Nigeria?" And he said no. But even if they did, they would never be able to repair for the human lives taken and the women stolen and the children murdered. And he listed all of the stuff that France had done, right? And I think we can't move beyond it. We need to keep it as part of the history. Germany has never moved beyond the Holocaust. But they haven't even acknowledged what they did in, or at least in any way repaired for what they did in Namibia, right? So there's a first step, and yes, there needs to be a reparative process. There needs to be a dismantling of the current systems which continue the same colonial systems, current systems which continue the same colonial project, I should say, such as the West African and Central African franc, which ties the currencies of West African French nations to France, and means that their currency is printed in France and pegged to the euro. They can't even control their own monetary policy, such as the uranium stuff we saw in the film. That all needs to be dismantled. And yeah, we need to start to recognize the reality of, as Robert said, what created the modern world that we live in, and dismantle these systems. I do think that one of the things, again, it's 1.5 hours, we couldn't get too deep into it, but the climate element of the film is both an element in terms of colonialism, the stuff about, because you can see that the trees are, talks about the trees starting to go away in the sense of spirituality, but also that's referencing deforestation, which is part of that region, right? North Africa in general, and the space between kind of West Africa and Western Northern Africa, where Niger lies, because where we actually were wasn't quite desert, but if you go slightly further to Niger, it is desert. But where we were, there was trees, but there were less trees than there'd been 100 years ago, because of the same climate change, which is a result of the industrialization that Britain likes to hark about. It likes to hark about, look at us, steam engine, this, that, the rest. We industrialized. We are the founders of the modern world. Doesn't mention how they got the wealth to do that, but also doesn't mention that for hundreds of years now, in terms of carbon emissions and the rest, Britain and France and these countries have been leading the way. And Britain really was the start of, when it started the modern industrial revolution, it started the climate crisis we see today in some ways. And solar energy is part of the solution. And we give a nod to solar energy in the film. That's part of the possible hope, but it's also a possible danger for recolonization. If solar energy ends up in the hands of, it ends up being like you all heard of the resource curse, right? Supposedly, that academics like to talk about when they talk about Africa. They say, oh, when a country is blessed with natural resources, it's going to have corruption and it's going to have this. No, when a country is blessed with natural resources, it's going to have lots of other imperialist, hawkish countries coming and trying to take those natural resources. And that has been the case with uranium in France, it's been the case with oil in Gabon, in Nigeria, it's been the case with rubber in the Congo, and it could very well end up the case with solar too. But solar also could be a great way for electricity independence for a large number of nations in Africa. And so that's something that could have been explored more, and which I think adds an element of hope, but which at least we managed to cover in the film.
You did excellently as well. We do have a question from the audience, which I'd like to take. It's from Sue. Sue, are you there? Do we have Sue? I don't want to read her question out. I'd like her.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, I'll just put my video on.
Okay, brilliant. Ask your question, Sue.
I've been superseded actually because I think Rob and Robert, between them, sort of looked at Heart of Darkness, and you as well, Sarah, and how central Heart of Darkness has become to the sort of literary canon. And I thought immediately when you started talking about Kurtz, I was very moved because Heart of Darkness is not just literary canon. It wasn't literary canon to me, by the way. My mum told me about it when I was about 5, I think, because she kept telling me, read these books, because she was a working class woman, and said, Heart of Darkness, this is what the world is like, Sue. And that was 2 white women talking to each other. So to me, it's a very alive text. And the other thing that I wanted to say was congratulations, because you made me cry. And it's okay, I think, to cry, just mourn what state of the world is and the brutality that lies at the heart of relationships and causes all this terrible manipulation, suffering, oppression. So those 2 things. But I was kind of thinking about the text all the way through and kind of wondering, because of the viewpoint. I think, again, you've talked about this. It's like the viewpoint of Heart of Darkness is a white man. And we need to interrogate white masculinity, of course we do. But we also need to supersede it.
We do, most definitely.
So I don't know if that's enough of a question, but I did think while you were talking, for the last half hour or something, I think, oh, actually they've done my question. Inevitably, sort of thing, but yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, it was just an interesting tension for me all the way through. This is a white man talking about white masculinity, and sort of tantalizing when you were talking to was he called the sheriff, the chief guy?
Okay.
Sorry not to be so. But the in charge guy. And sort of wondering what's his real psychology. He's a good leader, obviously, they love him, and he's got the right hat on, but what's his real psychology? Because everybody's psychology is involved in the whole of all of our cosmologies, all of our societies. Anyway.
Thank you very much, Sue. Femi, is there anything that you'd like to pick up on that?
In terms of the traditional leader, the Sultan of Benin Koni, I think, of course, when we look at these African things, we can always start to look at class or this, that, the rest of the internal dynamics. But really, his psychology in reference to this is the direct testament, the direct link he has to the leader of the place when this actual massacre happened. As I say, his great-grandfather, I believe it was the leader of Benin Koni when this massacre happened. So this has been told to him, and it's been told to it's him by his dad, and his dad maybe by their granddad. He's 1 or 2 generations, or 1 or 2 stories at least, separated from this event. If we think about Chinese whispers, right? He's not very far from the initial whisperer. There's not much chance for the story to actually go wrong between that, unless he's lying, or unless his dad lied, or unless the initial person who happened to lied. This is the direct testimony of the victim. And I think that's really, really important to take on board when we talk to people like the Sultan, or when we talk to a lot of the schoolgirls who talked about their great granddads, and this, that, the rest, that we are hearing direct testimony from the actual victims of these atrocities, a couple of generations removed. I mean, you can see that in their psychologies and in the way they reacted, in the sadness of the schoolgirls, in the righteous indignation of the Sultan, where he says these people should be in the International Criminal Court, which, by the way, is a very, very flawed institution, which has prosecuted only Africans in its short history, really. There was a special court set up in Yugoslavia, but the ICC generally has prosecuted a lot of Africans and hasn't really gone for anywhere else. So I do question whether or not, if this did happen today, it would happen in the go to the International Criminal Court, because the war crimes that the UK did in Iraq, for example, have not ended up there. But nonetheless, the righteous indignation of him, the sadness of the Iranian miners, all of this is direct testimony. And so I say that there's definitely a distinction between the psychology of that and the psychology of reading an academic text, or even hearing a story which has been told by a story that's being told by someone with no direct connection to the events.
Thank you. Dr. Robert, your point?
If I might.
Oh, yeah. Go on, Rob. No? Okay. Dr. Robert?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Rob.
Go ahead, Rob.
Okay.
Who am I going to? Dr. Robert or Rob?
I think Rob left it.
Yeah,
Rob.
I just had a thing coming up. My internet's unstable. I had a thing coming up, and my internet's unstable. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yep, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, fine. I was just going to tell just a very small story, I'm going to just tell a very small story, which you can see on the website, because in this film, it focuses on Boulay as a Kurtz type of figure, and everything that he does is really, really extreme and violent. And you must be forgiven for thinking, oh, he's some sort of, bad apple, or some extreme kind of case of something that has just unfortunately been visited by the French government on Niger. But in fact, what he did was it created the border between Niger and Nigeria. And you can read about it on our website. We did want to end the film with it, but I don't think we couldn't quite go with it. How it came about was that years after Boulay was killed, the reason he killed was killing in this kind of very, very intense way was because these were people, as I hope is relatively clear in the film, these were Hausa people who were living in the British controlled parts of Hausa land, as opposed to Hausa people who were living in the French, well, not the French, but the French, the part of Hausa land that France wanted to control. So many of the people that the Boulay killed were at that time in the British area. Now, what happened was that they're now in the French area because he conquered that area. And the reason why France and Britain agreed to swap those lands was, and you wouldn't believe this is the most sort of cynical and surreal and almost horrendous story. France had the fishing rights to fish for tuna off the coast of Newfoundland in Canada. And basically in London in 1904, 5 years after Boulay was killed at the place where you see the grave, France and British ambassadors and their foreign secretaries agreed to swap the tuna fishing grounds of Canada, of the east coast of Canada and the North Atlantic, for the land of Niger, that southern part of Niger. And that's how it was traded, tuna for people. And so I think and I'm telling that story partly as it's a grotesque story, but also it's because we have to remember, we say this is how the world is created. I mean, Hausa people, as they discuss in the film, they are divided between each other. One young girl says, a 15-year-old girl says, I can't go and see my sister. She lives in Nigeria and we're not allowed to go freely across the border. But it's a Hausa. All people speak the same language. And before the French and the British came there was no border. As they say very eloquently, those young teenage children, they put it very eloquently. They're telling you that there was a world without these kind of borders that their great-grandparents lived in, and that, you know, they're not necessarily saying we should go back to that, but actually we should probably think bigger than where we are now and just think, well, what is that world if you can go beyond borders? Just one other thing I would say, I suppose, that Dr. Roberts picked up on the spirituality, and I think that hopefully, I mean, I don't know whether we were able to do enough with it in the film, but I think part of the thing that goes with the spirituality is the respect for the environment, respect for land, respect for the things that are around us. And that kind of gets picked up a little bit, but only symbolically, because obviously it's a very dense film with the solar energy at the end, in the hope that, you know, solar, because this is light at the heart of darkness kind of thing, in the hope that, you know, solar independence and energy independence, as Femi was discussing earlier, can actually be part of something that can be enriched and made much more possible by the kind of attitude to the natural world that African spirituality, or Hausa spirituality in the particular case that we're talking about in that area, you know, is very, very well attuned to. But obviously with the modernism that has kicked in since that period, you know, there's been a kind of an increasing alienation from it. But, you know, we all know that we have to find another relationship with the physical world. Otherwise, the physical world is going to kind of be destroyed.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that, Rob. Dr. Beckford.
Yeah, three things that have come out of the discussion so far that I just want to throw out there. All P's. And this is really for Femi and also for Natural as well. One of the reasons we're having this discussion today is because we don't have a power base. When I started making films 20 odd years ago, there was very little happening in terms of just Black presence. I'm an academic. I got involved in filmmaking because I went on Right to Reply, which is a program on Channel 4 before you were born, Femi. You have to look in the history books to find out about this film. And they said, we can't get Black people to do factual television. So I said, well, show me how it's done. And, you know, the first one we made, we got an award for it. That was, I'd done my bit, you know, but what I've noticed is that 20 years on, we still don't have a power base. And maybe one of the ways in which you can take this film forward is by ensuring that what you do after this includes developing some kind of institutional structure for ensuring that there are films of that do this kind of historiography. That's really, really important, both for Femi and for Natural as a researcher as well. Really important, thinking about how this negotiates power within the industry. Second thing is, I just wondered if this film is going to be translated into French or other languages so that other people who don't have English as their first language can get access. Because I think we have to think about how we get films to people, because this is a really powerful film for people within that part of the world. And it would be a shame if they don't get access to it. One of the ways which I've managed to do this before is when people have asked to screen the film, I've pretended I haven't heard that there are rights issues or there are costs involved. And, you know, as long as, you know, we did this with one of my films on reparations. We allowed people to use it, to access it, to chop and change it in the Caribbean. And it helped to develop what is now the CARICOM reparations movement, getting the film to the people. So I'd really encourage you to think about how can you get this to people's mobile phones? You know, because that's the main medium for people accessing data across North and Western Africa. So, you know, it might be worth thinking about that. How can you chop and change this? The other thing that I think has come out of this is there is a real prior history of Black people in documentary filmmaking that I think it's worth engaging with to have a sense of where people have taken these ideas in the past, both in North America, the strong history of documentary filmmaking for the last 50 years, in Britain as well, so that you can position your future work in relation to this tradition. So again, that we're not always reinventing the wheel. We're not very good at doing that within the UK. African-American brothers and sisters are much better at talking about being in the tradition, whether it's music or whether it's the art. So again, I'd encourage you to think about that going forward in the next productions that you're involved in, Femi, and also with the work that you're doing, Natural as well.
Mm-hmm. For sure. In terms of the power base, I mean, we've seen the recent Steve McQueen series on BBC, right? And that's a shift, having traditional West Indian stories about disadvantages in education, about the Mangrove Five and this, that, the rest on mainstream BBC. And this is also a shift, having this on BBC, a film about French colonial history, which really actually criticizes an imperialist, but still the shift hasn't gone quite far. And most of what we're seeing is still Maggie Smith in Downton Abbey and this, that, the rest. And we're not telling those stories on any level as we should here in the UK. And there definitely needs to be some kind of institutionalized basis by which we can make this film. And I mean, it's still thinking at the back of my head, but if off the back of this film, some kind of institute with proper funding from backers could be had, which is like, cool, great. We have someone, even possibly I could go out in this film, but even we find someone of British Sudanese descent and have them going to Sudan to interrogate their history, going here or there or everywhere, right? And we could institutionalize that in some way. That would be something, that's a great suggestion. And it's something which had been in the back of my mind, but which maybe I need to start thinking about actually trying to realize, because it doesn't happen until you realize it, right? Until you reach out and you find the partners and you make it happen. In terms of the French thing, I mean, I've been working on my French, and I think I'm getting to the point where if it was laid out in front of me on a piece of paper, and I read it, and I could read in a fairly convincing way a French version of the voiceover, that's the only thing which would really need to be translated, because subtitles aren't that hard to do. You just have a different subtitle file, and most of the film is already in either Hausa or French. A lot of it is in French already, right? The actual interactions which happen there. It's my voiceover, which is the main thing. And even if that can't happen, we can always get someone to dub that. So I do think definitely it will be translated to French, and it will be distributed in France. That has to happen, because the film is about French colonialism. It needs to cause a havoc in France. It needs the French government to be worried about it. It needs to it needs people in France, and not just people in France, but also Black communities in France to see it. And that's something that we need to discuss with. I think we figured out who. Jeff Arbon is a producer, and he told me that we've now got a global producer, and we've kind of sorting out how it will be distributed in France and the rest already. But for sure, it needs to be translated into French. But also, yeah, it needs to be translated into Turkish, Portuguese, and all the others. Maybe even if it isn't dubbed in all these languages, right? You need to have the subtitle track in all these languages, and it needs to be gotten out there primarily to the Black, the kind of global Pan-African community. So whether that's the Black diaspora in the Caribbean, whether that is people on the continent in French-speaking Africa, Portuguese-speaking Africa, English-speaking Africa, even North Africa, but also to the whole world, because colonialism made the modern world. And colonialism didn't just happen in Africa; it happened in India, it happened in Burma, it happened it happened all over the place, right? And so this needs to be a film which is seen globally, not just by those who can click on a geolocked BBC thing and say, I have a TV license. So that's something which we have to think about in the long run and discuss and consider.
And if it helps, one of the things that I've done with some of our back catalogue is have your generation cut and mix them into music. So some of them we turned into music videos. And again, it's just another way in which people can then consume the ideas. So just worth.
And I'm actually a musician as well. So I have music videos online. So we've already thought about making some music videos for the film.
Pro Tools makes us all experts. We're all Jay-Z now. So I mean, so you know, again, think about how you might re-edit it, cut it. So again, start a movement as a consequence of this. So it gets into the hands of the people. French musicians, French Algerian musicians do a lot of great hip hop work. How can this help them reimagine their struggle and engage in the post-colonial discourse that's taking place in France? So yeah, fantastic.
Fabulous, thank you. And to you, Natural.
Yes. It's a few things that I want to say about the actual filmmaking of this, and just the way the stories were unfolding, and the fact that when I looked at it a second time, it didn't even feel like a documentary to me, which now I know it was structured almost as a narrative in the beginning, and it has that feel, but it has that personality or that connection, especially through Femi, for me as someone that's seeking, you know, and I wanted to know about the actual spirituality or the change that I perceived he made in making a film, but also not only in Femi, but in Rob in terms of making a film, because was there any type of shift in idea, spirituality, or context that changed from the beginning to the end of the film?
And that's to you, Rob.
Oh, to me or to Femi?
Femi and Rob, because I'm asking about a spiritual change or growth, because within the progression of the film, I thought I saw that, but I wasn't sure on how it really transpired with you.
I mean, I made that journey. So I made the journey with Femi once, but I made the journey myself 3 times in order to prepare the film, so that those scenes could appear to be, all right, this happens now, and we go to the Sultan, and we blah, 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 and with these people are all just in place and so on. So I kind of, and you know, I could probably go there tomorrow. It's actually dangerous to go there now. It's too dangerous to film, but you know, I could go there tomorrow and make my way through and sort of all those villages and all those places again. So in a way, that journey for me as the person doing the mounting of the production and the shooting of the film and how to sort of present it on a screen and stuff, it just went into a very deep sort of place in my sort of spirit and my imagination and but I think that what probably happened, and I'll be honest with you, you know, I think this film faced a lot of very problematic difficulties that we were able to overcome, but I don't speak Hausa. I speak French, okay, but I don't speak Hausa. So we took Amina and Hassan, who were the guides for Femi, and they were there really because there's no way that, I mean, Femi speaks a little bit of Hausa, but kind of Google Hausa, shall we say, Femi, yeah? I mean, you know, it's kind of like we can't really kind of expose it to sort of, in villages, it wasn't possible to get deep with people. So they were really helping us to get deep with people. And I think for me, a lot of the getting deep with people in terms of the preparation and then in terms of the journey that we made when we filmed felt deep, and it felt humanly deep in terms of just the trust that we were getting with people and the real sense of collectiveness in the way that we were working together, because it wasn't like we were just coming along and saying, oh, could you do this? We're filming a scene. There was a real sense of in many of the communities that we worked, and I would say almost probably in all of the communities that we finally filmed with, there was a sense of collaboration together, and that was really important. But for me personally, the real, shall we say, I don't know what the word was, like, you know, apotheosis or something, or kind of denouement to the whole immersion in the thing, didn't really come until the dialogues of everybody speaking in Niger in Hausa was fully translated. Yeah, I didn't know. I only knew really what people were saying when we got back here. And so for me, I felt like I did feel like a, you know, like I say, a very deep human connection that was intensifying. And I think also, I'll just say one other thing, because I'm conscious of the fact that I've been speaking for a few minutes now. But I think that one thing that happened as we went across the country of Niger and we got to the grave, and it was, you know, there's obviously a lot of issues when you're making a film, especially when you're making a film that's got a certain mainstream type of storytelling. Yeah, we're trying to sort of, we're not being experimental. We're being, you know, a little experimental, but not really within a very much a mainstream format. But one of the things was what we were going to find at the end. And I think it was interesting that when we got to the end, even though I'd been to the grave 3 times or twice, well, no, actually 3 times before we got there in the shooting journey, when we got there, there was this immense anger, but an anger that was being released because, you know, we were all engaging with this as when we got to the grave. We're standing on the grave of Vule, standing in a kind of real physical sense, but also and this is not something that actually even the people in that village, on that town, tend to do much, because it's a place that they walk past and they keep the grave, it's maintained in the hope that maybe tourists might come along and, you know, French tourists would come along to visit it, and it may be worth some money at some point. But essentially, we were all standing on the grave. The people at the grave said, you know, why don't we dig up the bones and you can take them back and get rid of this bastard forever out of our lives. And that sense of anger wasn't really just a negative, nihilistic anger. It was a very cathartic anger, which I hope that is, going back to what Robert and you were saying early on, I hope is something that will lead to something of genuine sort of social value, of, reparative worth, that intense sense that, yeah, we can get, for the people in my Jiggy, they can get really angry with the situation that they're in. And I think it's the fact that they are living with Vule right in their midst that makes them more angry than in other places, because actually it's just this thing that's like right literally part of their everyday environment that they have to walk past. In all the other places that we went, and obviously there were many places that we filmed that we didn't show, and there are many other places where things happened that we didn't film in. All those other places were places where people could feel just as angry. But the fact is that there's this monument, like a kind of reverse statue that's just landed there like a meteorite, sitting there saying, here we are, I'm not going anywhere. And it's a symbolic, incredible sort of metaphor for the control, the kind of clamp of France, in this particular case, France, on this community in Niger. And so going towards that anger, I think, was a very, very profound thing. And like I say, I don't want it to be seen as being that the anger was negative. I think the anger was actually deep and positive, and I hope it kind of goes forward, but not filled with negative hatred just for its own sake, but harnessing the anger to be able to get something good.
Thank you.
In different ways.
That was a powerful moment when Femi began to kneel and he told him, stand up. You didn't come here to pay respect, right? And that just spoke volumes, because there's a balance between how you show up in the world and how you show up to other people, and what's looked at as power and what's looked at as respect and what's looked at as like achievement and accomplishment, and for that moment when he stood up, it felt real when you saw all the people around, and there was a sense of anger, but it also was a sense of healing at that moment, because I think people had a chance to speak out, which they probably, like you said, just walk by or might feel a way about it, but never had the opportunity to express it out of their spirit, out of their minds, out of their mouth, how it affected them. So I felt like that was a powerful moment.
Awesome.
And we hope to, I'll just say very briefly, Sarah, I know you want to say that, but we hope to be going, when the security situation is right, to take a caravan across the country, all the communities that we worked with, and have the film with the communities, and leave the archive of everything, because obviously there's a lot of stuff that was filmed that's very interesting that's not in the film. So and every community, every town, every village, every place that we go, that the film will be shown, and that the archive will be there as a kind of collective resource, and maybe the beginning of somehow expanding on that and formalizing that kind of gathering of oral history, because obviously the generations are getting further and further away.
Excellent. And I will be in that caravan, Rob. I will be there, okay. Femi,
right, great.
with my bags and my camera. So guys, we're going to start wrapping up. I will go to you, Natural, and then to Robert, and then to you, Rob, and then to you, Femi, and then I will give outgoing intros. So, who did you say I was going to first? Natural, over to you.
Yes. I just want to say this is a powerful film. It had me think and see things so differently. There's so many questions that I have for Femi, just because I was engulfed in his experience, and I was kind of viewing the film from his perspective, and also almost engaged in the feelings and the intensity, and just even it was so many points where his eyes just changed, and his intensity and his focus was like he was being taken over so many different times in different ways. So it was just intriguing, and the whole film itself, just from the way the voiceovers came in and the way the film was just put together with so many elements, even archival footage, and it was laid out in a beautiful way, and it's in a way where it forces you to think and question things. So I applaud you all for the filmmaking, and also for having the guts to take on the experience.
Thank you. It was beautifully filmed. The cinematography was awesome. Dr. Beckford.
I would like to echo what Natural has said and maybe add two things. Firstly, thank you for giving me what Bell Hooks terms killing rage, because as I watched the film, I felt the anger of the people, the anger of Femi regarding this history. And I think that's really important, that we connect with people's emotions and don't see that as a negative thing, but see that as a way in which people learn and produce knowledge. So thank you for that. The second thing I want to thank you for is for giving me what the German philosopher, the last century, Johann Baptist Metz terms dangerous memories. This is a dangerous memory. And he argues that dangerous memories are there to shape and to help us shape and interpret the current events that we face. And this is a dangerous memory that gets us to rethink Europe's relationship with contemporary Africa, rethink Francophone colonization, rethink how we understand how the West was built on racism and colonization. So thank you for the killing rage and for the dangerous memories.
Thank you. And to you, Rob, closing remarks?
Well, just thank you to both Robert and Natural, and to you in the audience, and to Sue. With that, like we've been. I think this is the last one of 7, isn't it? So I didn't do every night, but I've been on with you with Sarah. Obviously, Femi's done every night. But for the 4 that I've been on, they've been very different ideas coming out every night, and it's really, really exciting that this film has spoken to people in this way. So I'm really pleased, and thank you very much for all of your enthusiasm. And you know, definitely when we've recovered from the tiringness of making a film, then we have to get back and do all those things that you say, and be part of that, definitely. So thank you so much for your great enthusiasm and interesting, provocative ideas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, to you, Femi, you've been on for the last 7 days. You've participated in many discussions and met many new people. And I just want to echo what everybody else has said. It's a tremendous film. Thank you. Thank you for putting in the work. Thank you for your tireless activism. And what are your closing remarks?
Yeah, I'm very grateful for the comments tonight and the ideas. Just to respond a little bit to Natural's question from before, it was a very spiritual journey in many ways. And obviously you can see the shift and you can see the connection and how it changed throughout and how I connect with the people. And there's many ways that I connected with the people on the journey that don't make it into the film, because it isn't a film about Femi's package holiday. It's a film about about French colonial history, right? But I can assure you it was a very, 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 very life-changing experience. And I hope it's the first of many projects that I can be involved in that tell these stories and open these histories out. And even in terms of this story, as we've outlined, there's so much more left to do in terms of making sure that it's pushed internationally, in terms of making sure that these conversations happen internationally, panels like this happening across the diaspora and not just the English-speaking diaspora, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm looking forward to get involved in all that as well.
Absolutely awesome. My closing remarks is, as a student of Ifa, I believe that the Orisha would be well pleased. As a student of Vudon, I believe that the Lawa would be well pleased that we are telling a story in a different way, and we are giving insight into our culture and also our spirituality. I would just like to thank everybody in the audience that turned up. I would like to thank Sue for her comments. You can follow for more updates with regards to the African Apocalypse on the Facebook page, which is the African Apocalypse Film Tour, I believe the IG is. And you can continue to use the hashtag A Time to Testify, African Apocalypse Tour, be a witness, and no justice, no peace. Also, a massive shout out to the New Black Film Collective for hosting the screenings, and thank you for everybody that has taken part. And until we meet again, God bless you, stay safe, and happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yay, well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well done.
Thanks so much,
guys.
Cara. And thanks.
That's okay.
Thanks, Natural and Robert as well.
Thank
you very
you.
much indeed.
God
Brilliant.
bless. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Right. Have a nice festive season.
You too.
Bye.
Love you lots, Priscilla. Take care, Kendall. Happy holidays.
Thank you, Sarah. That was excellent.
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Natural.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rob. God bless. Bye. Thank you, Kendall.
Thank you. Have a good night.
To you.